Most of you though. If you own a Kinsey planter, you'll have this sheet. Who doesn't have one that wants one? The brush meter guys. Take one. Okay. Who's seen this before? I guess I better keep one. Who's seen this before? Okay. You need to understand this sheet. The two main things you need to understand are right at the top. Blue and black. And here's our two plates. So, all right. This is what everybody's concern is. Our phone's been ringing off the hook for 3 months now about this problem. Not just Pioneer, by the way. Okay? So a typical spring day goes for me, May 7th, 2:30 in the afternoon. I get a phone call. Everybody that's heard me speak before knows I love telling stories. These are all true stories. I just keep the names out. Usually I look around the room and see if the person I'm talking about is here first, and if they are, I change the story. So 2:30 in the afternoon, very common for me to get this phone call. Something's wrong. I just filled the planter up. I'm heading back to the field. All my seed boxes, when I filled it, are a different height. And now I'm concerned that something's wrong. Okay, so what's been going on today? Well, I started this morning. I was planting 185,000 this morning. It started to drop down. Got to 175, got to 165. When it got to 165, I changed the transmission. Okay, first mistake, right? Should you ever change the transmission on a mechanical drive if your population is falling? Why? Because it's falling for a reason. Okay? It's similar to having a big hole in your tire, and so going and buying an air compressor and putting a hose on it and running the air compressor as you're driving around all day. You're masking the problem. Okay? You should never ever change the transmission for a falling population. You need to figure out why it's falling. Okay? So then he says, after lunch, it was even lower. But I'd already bumped the transmission twice by then. And when I filled up at 2 o'clock, I noticed all the seed cans were different. But as I'm going back to the field, I thought maybe I should call Shaun. And that's usually, it'll be a planter just like this, with extensions always, filled right to the brim, and it's a hot day. I've had this call multiple times from 32 row planters in the last couple of years. 32 rows with extensions on them. It doesn't go well when you tell them the only way to solve your problem is to empty out all your boxes, take this plate and put this plate in. But we can solve this problem before this happens to you. Now let's all be honest. How many people in this room have had this problem happen where they've had to change the plates? Exactly. And now I want to try to help you prevent that, because there's a way to prevent it. The sticker, I've been in the seed business my whole life. A lot of you guys probably don't know it. Neil does. We work together at Highland. But I worked for Highland Seeds right out of college. And when I was in college, I guess. And ever since then, I've been a custom harvester for Pioneer Seeds. I harvest what you grow. Okay, I've been doing that for 30 years. So I'm pretty familiar with the seed business. Now, when that tag says 2,400 seeds per pound, is every seed in that bag 2,400 seeds per pound? No, not a chance. Whose fault is that? No. Who grew Pioneer? Hey, they write my paychecks sometimes. They're at fault for nothing. No. Who grows the seed? You do. You guys grow it. So if you were the one selling your beans, and you could put it in a bag that was $70 for 50 pounds, or you could put it in a bin that was $13 for 60 pounds, which one would you put it in if you're selling? I know which one I'd put it in. I'd be putting it in the $70 for 50 pounds. Now that being said, the reason this all changed, and anybody from Pioneer that's here can correct me if I'm wrong, but the way I understand it, a few years ago, the government allowed us to have a couple more screen sizes. Right, Chris? To an extent. Pioneer has, and so have some of the other companies, they've shrunk that back down, and they've tried to take out those marbles for you. And it doesn't always seem to compute, but it does. So we had a case a couple years ago with a 32-row planter, and he had this plate in, and he was running 2,800 seeds per pound, and it bothered. Okay, does anybody know why it bothers before we go any farther? What causes it to bother? When there's marble seeds, what happens? They get caught in there. They wedge in there. And the other thing that happens is when they're down in here, when your seed's down in here, and you got big ones, they're too big to go into this. They're too big to even wedge. And so they stay there, and you pick out the small ones, and you plant away. And pretty soon all that's left down there is big ones, and we all know what happens to them when they get rolled around too many times. It turns into mush and pieces. And then between the wedged ones in here, and the mush in here, and the big ones that won't mush, we won't have any small ones left to pick up. So that's the problem. So this gentleman calls me, and he says, and he's got a 32-row planter, and it's 2:30 in the afternoon, and it's a hot day, and it's cranked right full. And I say, you got to change this out. So he does. He's at 2,800 seeds per pound, but that was one of the first years that they increased the number of seed screen sizes we could use. And it was wedged full. Next day, he's got this plate in, and he calls me, and the planter's cranked right full. And it's doing the same thing. Does anybody know why?
Too small seeds get jammed in.
You got her. You got her. You've had that too, eh? So that can be a problem. When you are up in that 26, 27, 2,800 seeds per pound size, and you switch this plate, life's not going to be necessarily wonderful. And that's why Pioneer has supposedly taken enough of those marbles out on those bigger size, on those smaller sizes, on the bigger numbered sizes, that you shouldn't have that issue as much as you did about 4 years ago. Okay? So be aware of that. If you're in that 2,200 to 2,400, 2,500, you're probably fine. But when you're up into the bigger numbers of the smaller seed, you could run the risk of what we just said. Okay? How do we solve this problem? We started with the biggest problem off the start, and we're going to go into a bunch of maintenance, we're going to go into a bunch of other things. But this is the biggest problem that you're here for. Okay? How do we solve the problem ahead of time? Everybody that knows me knows I go to the field, I do anything, I try to be 80 to 90% prepared ahead of time. This is one of those things you can solve before you ever even, right now. Who's got their seed in their shed already? Nobody? Neil, when do you deliver seed now? Okay, so when you get your seed, you can solve this problem. And you can mark on your skids, you can mark on your wagons what plate you're going to use. How do you think you're going to solve the problem ahead of time?
Well, I'll just take a seed sample out of the wagon and take a disc and see if it easily goes through the fingers and the top.
Colleen, we need prizes today because he's going to get a whole bunch. Okay, so I'm going to pass these around. So what we do is you jump in the wagon, you open the bag, you peel open the Pro Box, you do whatever you need to do, and you get a sample. And you're going to think I'm crazy at first, but this works. But I guess we better start up here. When you start to look at a seed sample, you're going to think it all looks the same, but it doesn't, especially to those of us that work with it all the time. We want you to look for the biggest bean in there. And it's going to take you a few seconds to get your eyes going and get used to it. But you find the biggest bean you can find. Who's got the... Give me that one for a minute, Mike. I don't have any big honking beans here today. I tried to get some, but we just didn't get any. I'm just trying to close it so we don't have a disaster. There you go. So, you take what you think is one of the biggest beans. You take your black plate. So let's say this is sitting at 2,400 seeds per pound on your tag. You take your black plate, you put it into the slot, you push down on it. First of all, will it go in? If it won't go in, it's too big. But if it will go in, push it down gently, flip it over. If it falls out, are you good to go? You are. You just solved the problem. ahead of time. Mark on your slot, black plate. But make sure you look around a little bit. Don't just look at the top, portion. Dig around a little bit, solve the problem. You'll find those marbles, and if they won't go in there at all, or if they wedge in, don't even do it. Don't go there. Go to this plate. So then I get the automatic question in the phone calls or in the field visits of, well, I'm going to solve my problem ahead of time, and I'm just going to use the blue plate. And what do you say to that? Don't do it, right? Because that's a bad idea. First of all, you're going to double up. So now you've taken your singulated planter and you've turned it into kind of a controlled spillage. But that's what we call drills. And you're not solving the problem. So the second part of the first story, we'll forget the second part of the first story where he called back with this one. So when this happens, so that 2:30 phone call, I get a 4 o'clock phone call. Did you guys know that? I do. So when they put all these plates in, they call back in an hour and a half or 2 hours or 4 hours, however long it takes it. But when they're on their first round back in the field, they call back and they say, I don't know why you told me to switch the plate. You didn't solve anything. I'm still planting way low. This is 60 cell. This is 48 cells. Sometimes I'm in a little bit of a hurry on a busy spring day. I usually deal with over 100 phone calls in a day and usually about 5 or 6 service calls. So sometimes I forget to tell you the Paul Harvey version and the rest of the story. But I usually answer the phone, don't I? Okay? But sometimes I do admit I forget to tell you, don't forget to change the transmission. So the reason why that's so important is do the math on that. It's a 20% reduction. And you're right back to where you were before you started. And by the time you don't even think of the possibility of a transmission, and I don't blame you, you just see the monitor and you just go, I didn't solve a damn thing. But you did. Okay? What else is going to help this problem? This is really important. So what else is going to